Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, host of the Football History Dude podcast, right here on the Sports History Network. Now, before we jump into another sports history adventure, let me tell you about this episode's sponsor. We partnered with Rochester Sports Autographs, the largest JSA authenticated autograph distributor in the United States, where you can get deals on over 30,000 autographed sports collectibles. They even have film, music, and other entertainment autographs on the site, so there's something for everyone. Perhaps you're looking for a gift for Mother's Day, or maybe Father's Day. Heck, who needs a holiday as an excuse to give a piece of sports history to your loved ones? Or how about yourself? Today seems like a great day to add to your sports cave, right? But how is RSA able to offer such great deals on JSA authentication, you ask? Well, they do this by making deals directly with athletes, so there are no extra markups, and they choose to pass these savings on to the customer. All orders from Rochester Sports Autographs are top quality and shipped to your door with top authentication and money-back guarantee. And to make sure RSA knows that the Sports History Network sent you, we created a special link for you. All you have to do is head to shoprsa.com/SHN. Again, that's shoprsa.com/SHN. Head over there to get your piece of sports history today. This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. On February 6, 2018, the first demonstration flight of SpaceX's Falcon Heavy rocket took place from Launch Pad 39A at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Now, this was a turning point and a new chapter in space exploration. Around this same time, yours truly was in the middle of working on figuring out this whole podcasting thing, leading to something he hoped would create the same hype as Elon Musk's Falcon Heavy rocket. This show would ultimately be called the Football History Dude.
Welcome to the Football History Dude podcast, where each episode is a journey back in time to learn about the rich history of the NFL. Your host is Arnie Chapman. Football is his passion, and he wants you to come along with him to explore the yesteryear of the gridiron. So hop on board his DeLorean, and let's get this baby up to 88 miles per hour.
Great Scott!
This time we step up to the DeLorean. The date is April 15th, 2018. 2 months after that Falcon Heavy launched, eagerly waiting to see if we have any new downloads for the recently released Football History Dude podcast. You see, because technically, April 15th of 2018 was the first launch of the Football History Dude podcast. This was just the trailer episode because the first episode, well, we got to talk about Walter Camp, that released April 18th. And at the time of this episode being released to you today, this marks the 5-year anniversary, technically, of the football, well, maybe not technically April 15th, but we're going to go ahead and say the first episode of the Football History Dude podcast. Hopping in the DeLorean for 5 years, meeting new people, learning so much about football history, and ultimately, I want to thank you, the listener, because you've been around with me, whether it's been the whole 5 years, or just the last episode, or somewhere in between. And if you have been listening to this podcast, you probably noticed there's been a change this year. Less episodes have been releasing. Really didn't have anything since, late February, a new one. And then all of a sudden, past couple days, you got hit with 4 in a row. Bam, 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 bam. But it had kind of the same feel, but it was a different verbiage. Something about fantasy football origin stories. Well, that's something I'll get into a little bit later in this episode. Again, this 5-year anniversary episode. Let me take you a little walk down memory lane. You see, when I first started this whole origin of, I'm going to start a podcast thing, I was originally going to be called the Fantasy Football Dude. And I was going to have a fantasy football podcast, and I was going to talk about what everyone else talks about, sleepers, busts, what have you, rankings and such. But let's just say there were so many fantasy football podcasts out there that I decided maybe I should take a tune. But even so, even that December of 2017, I even got a remote control for the Xbox FF Dude on it. But again, I'd be a small fish in a big sea. So I figured let's try something different. Listen into hardcore history. This is Dan Carlin, episode 100 and 101, mind you not. Kind of like my podcasting hero, I guess you could say. And I like football, more specifically the NFL. Love history. Well, let's put the two things together, and boom, we got the Football History Dude podcast. So I started originally with those solo episodes. You know, if you've listened to them, it was me just talking on the mic, researching a topic. The first one was Walter Camp. And at the beginning, we kind of went down the whole, first class of the Hall of Fame. But after a while, I ended up having interviews. These interviews actually started because of Upton Bell. The first, well, not the first release, but the first interview that I had on the Football History Dude podcast. Upton Bell, he's been across the Sports History Network many times. Son of Burt Bell, the first great commissioner, and he was with the world champion Baltimore Colts, New England Patriots, all sorts of things. So it got me on this track. I'm like, let's start doing some more interviews. So then I naturally lead into, well, let's look at these books, these authors, that type of thing, and started reaching out. And of course, Joe Ziemba, Joe Zagorski. Maybe not, of course, because maybe you haven't heard those episodes. These Joe Z's, we'll call them both historians who maybe were not as technically savvy. Both were interested in podcasting, though. So we started their shows. One, Joe Ziemba, When Football Was Football. Joe Zagorski. Back then, it was called Pigskin Pass, but then it changed to Pro Football in the 1970s. Ultimately, this ended up leading to what we now know as the Sports History Network. And then we had Darren Hayes coming on board with the Pigskin Dispatch, later on the Jersey Dispatch, pretty much breaking the mold, having a daily show, crazy amount of content. And it just kind of went from there. I got to give a special shout out, of course, to Jeremy McFarland, Footballist Family. Because at the very beginning, he reached out. We're talking like episode 1 or 2 or something like that, had reached out and just said, hey, keep it going. I really like your stuff. So, the whole fuel for the tank kind of deal. But there's now 35 plus shows, 20 of them are actively releasing, and majority of them do revolve around football. So there's way too many people to say thank, between the podcasters, listeners, sponsors, everything else. So I don't want to leave anybody out. But what I'm trying to get at is it's been a long, fun, full 5 years. And I think that as I announce this next thing, which leads me into the fantasy football origin stories, the Football History Dude is going to be, we'll call it a temporary hiatus. I'm going to pause it right now. I'm going to leave it up there. Going to have all the episodes available. But I'm not going to be posting regularly for at least some time. I don't even know when I'm going to get back to it, because I'm starting this new show, the Fantasy Football Origin Stories, where I can kind of go back to the roots, the Fantasy Football Dude initially, where I get this possibility, idea, talk about the fantasy football industry, and then I can go ahead and talk to, people and learn about their fantasy football origin stories. So if you're interested in that, I recommend you checking the show out. We even have a website dedicated to it. It's called, go find it at fantasyfootballoriginstories.com. Again, that's fantasyfootballoriginstories.com. It's going to be a fantasy football show, like it says, origin stories, talking to analysts, maybe people who started or founded, maybe the DraftKings founders, who knows, that kind of thing. But it's just learning about how the fantasy football industry has come to be through the eyes of the people that have helped build it. So it's still a historical perspective, but it's not quite the same football kind of overarching, mostly NFL that we've been covering on this show. Again, we've got plenty of football history content for you over on the Sports History Network, which I don't know if you've checked that out website before, but if you have not, you should probably go check out sportshistorynetwork.com/podcasts. Over there, you'll be able to see the icon for all the different podcasts broken down by category. Many of them cover multiple sports. So whatever you're into, I'm pretty sure you can go find your next favorite podcast over there. But again, thank you for whatever part of the past 5 years you've listened to, whether it's this only episode, just found us, maybe go back and listen to the back catalog, or you've been there from the beginning. Either way, like I said, keep this feed active, because down the road, hopefully I'm putting more episodes out there. But right now, I'm going to go ahead and focus on growing the Sports History Network and releasing more episodes for fantasy football origin stories. So I guess it's kind of like Doc Brown, in the Back to the Future 3. I'm going to stay back in the 1800s. Going to go ahead and live that good life, but possibly I'll be flying back to the future with that locomotive in the sky. You never know. But all I'm going to say is I'll leave you with this. For now, dude, I'm through if you're through.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Football History Dude. To make sure you're the first to get the next episode, please subscribe on your podcast player of choice and head on over to thefootballhistorydude.com for the show notes and more information on the history of the NFL. And remember, dudes, where we're going, we don't need roads.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.